All right, guys, we've got big news, and that is the fact that we have Ptr Patch Notes. Now, this is something that we've been hearing whispers about for a long time. Apparently, there is, I don't know if it's a Discord group, there's some sort of group discussion going on, as far as I've heard, where a lot of the pro gamers are all in a big discussion group, and they've actually been working for a long time to come together to make a community patch. And this is actually something where the balance is completely done, from what I can tell, by consensus amongst pro gamers, which is very different to how patches have been done in the past. And it is obviously going to be on the conservative end of things. Nonetheless, it is incredibly exciting because the pro gamers get just as frustrated with boring play as anybody else and with problem points. And so I'm actually really happy with the changes we've seen. Anyways, let's go through and take a look at the actual changes. So first off, the shield battery starting energy is reduced from 100 to 50 outside of the next field. Now, I assume what this means is the slow warp in field. So if you're building a shield battery on a pylon offensively, that means it'll start with half energy. So unless you're building it next to a warp gate or a nexus, it's gonna be not as good. So defensively, same strength shield battery, and offensively, it's gonna be half the strength when it comes into play, which is gonna weaken shield battery, void ray, offensive play, battery cannon, battery immortal, all that sort of bullshit. So that actually sounds really, really good. Some people are saying it's meant to be nexus. Yeah, whatever it's meant to be, the next field, nexus field, it basically, because we've got a fast warp in pylon and a slow warp in, people are saying only nexus. So they're going to make it nexus only, not just warp gates. Okay, so even if you build a warp gate next to it, it still won't start. I mean, warp gate's much later in the game anyway, so it's pretty rare you're building shield batteries next to a warp gate offensively, right? Because that's much later, but interesting to see. So apparently Harstem has confirmed it is meant to be nexus. Harstem's apparently the guy who you guys can blame for these balance changes, guys. I'm not part of this discussion. I didn't get invited. They don't trust me to have a good attitude. Now, this is an amazing change, guys. Dark Templar now have a 0.75 second attack delay after blink. The way it is at the moment is you could blink 15 DTs on 15 Marines and Marauders and then just kill them all before the bio player reacts, and it's super triggering. DT blink is already still not bad at initiating since it's not that big of a delay. But it slows down you killing a planetary instantly. It slows down you know, even if there's a few Widowminds one-shotting the planetary and then you die to the 2 Widowminds that are burrowed. It makes it just a little bit less ridiculous. It's still good for getting away. It's still good for jumping out of detection range and being annoying and being a nuisance with. You can jump up cliffs. It's just a little bit less obnoxious for one of the most high damage output ridiculous units in the game, which especially against Terran, because they have such weak detection, they don't have an Overseer or an Observer or an Oracle, these very accessible pieces of mobile, cheap, easy to produce detections. You know, it really makes a big difference in that matchup. So this is helping to ease one of the most disgusting things to play against in late game PvT at high level is the Protoss just needs to split the Terran's attention up enough, and there's always one point where you think, yes, I'm winning, and then you look over and half of your army on one side of the map is just gone, and you didn't even see it die, and you're like, far out, man, this is so gross. So yeah, that's a really nice change. And the thing is, I still think people like me and regular Joes are still going to have the DTs blink on our army and kill it when we're not watching, because this isn't that big of a delay. But it's going to at least ease that off in pro play, so you don't just see the DTs blink, clear an entire tank line before the tanks can fire at the start of a fight, which we've seen quite a few times, and Zest was the real guy who created a meta where people realized how good blink DTs were, because Zest has made more disgusting DT comebacks in PvT than anybody else. Hats off to him for being the guy who showed us how broken this unit is. He's also the guy who has really pushed forward a lot of the metas. He made the most solid Void Ray builds, remember guys? And before that, he's the guy who made the really, really well-refined Adept builds. So remember, just a little heads up, guys. If it wasn't for Zest, Protoss would probably be a stronger race. Or because it wouldn't get nerfed as much. On the other hand, everyone would play it worse because they wouldn't improve as much. I don't even know. Anyways, the Void Ray is being nerfed, guys. Now, last patch we had 2 years ago, year and a half ago. I don't know how long ago it was now. It feels like an eternity. The Void Ray got buffed in a bunch of different ways. Now, I believe it was 3 buffs. I think there might have been a 4th, but if there was, I can't remember it. Essentially, the one that's staying is the speed or acceleration. So the Void Ray, I think its passive speed is still staying as fast as it is now, but its build time is being reverted from 37 to 43, so 6 extra seconds build time and 50 extra minerals to build it. And this is very important for negating these mass Void Ray styles versus Zerg, because even though Void Rays aren't the best unit at fighting front on, their ability to mesh with shield batteries as well as defensively, where they could always pull back from queens and you could never really close in and finish them off, and fight alongside cannons and the like, as well as their mobility for sniping hatcheries, was very obnoxious. So this is something Zerg players are going to be so happy about, and Protoss players are going to be, no, but I only make Void Rays. A lot of the Protoss population basically have just been massing Void Rays, and it's been one of the worst things ever, and it's forced one of the most obnoxious Zerg metas in response to that, which has been queens walking off creep, and queens can no longer transfuse off creep, and that is fantastic. I love that it's taken 10, 12 years of StarCraft 2 for us to realize that your base macro unit being one of the tankiest units until tier 3, like, 3 queens is basically an Ultralisk in terms of tankiness, and they like have a 125 instant transfuse that just is ridiculous, and they could stack 4 transfuses. So queens were always a crazy unit, right? Once they got like the 5 range versus ground and then the 8 range versus air, they had all these, they had all these buffs that came in. They finally nerfed transfuse down to 75 transfuse healing, and then the next 50 ticks over like 5 seconds. So it's not as instantly 125, 125, 125 in terms of the healing, right? Which is awesome. But we also now see that queens can no longer transfuse off creep. So if you Nidus Worm, if you get an Overlord Highway, anything like that, if you drop out of an Overlord and start pooping creep, they will still be able to transfuse. There will still be some strategies where you can do that. But the let's just walk off creep with our queens is going to be good. I've already seen some really intelligent comments about that, saying that this change specifically is going to make Protoss ground play more viable, because the queen push was the reason why Protoss ground play wasn't good, which is like, what? We'll read some Reddit comments in a moment, okay, guys? But I was like, no, the queen, the problem was it beat airplay, it beat Void Rays. That's what the queen was good at. It wasn't the worst thing at transfusing some roaches and ravagers if like you could actually do some queen walks on like really short maps against a ground Protoss, but it was never particularly good versus that. Anyway, guys, this also ties in with this last change, which might seem confusing, so we're going to go back to the Widowmind and Lurker in a moment. The Nidus Worm increased starting creep by 1 unit in each direction around the worm once it spawns. What this means is that because the Nidus Worm would pop and then it would kind of gradually start popping out creep just very steadily around it, now as soon as it spawns, it's immediately going to have a single square or hex, whatever you want to call it, of creep all around the Nidus. And that's just so that queens popping out can still instantly transfuse. So they're saying, look, just this here is just to make sure that the queens not being able to transfuse off creep doesn't weaken the Nidus Worm. So the Nidus Worm interaction is going to stay essentially the same. And I'm like, fair enough, makes sense. They don't want to have an unforeseen circumstance. So good foresight from the pro gamers to come to the consensus of making that happening. Anyway, guys, so we've got Widowmind. Now, they've reduced the effectiveness of drilling claws. So they say effectiveness. What they mean is the burrow speed of drilling claws from 0.71 seconds to 1.07 seconds. So that is a 0.26 second delay on drilling claws. So that just means that those Widowminds are going to burrow slightly slower. This is just going to make those, I guess, 1-base drilling claw Widowmind builds in PvT a little bit weaker. It's going to make it just a little bit easier to get on top of them when you're Zerg as well. Yeah, Widowmind harass is pretty triggering. I don't know if it's like the most overpowered thing. It's definitely something that this is a very marginal speed change, right? Kind of the same with 0.75 seconds. I'm like, it's not that much time. Yes, StarCraft's fast-paced, but especially for average Joes, I feel like no one's going to notice the difference. This is really, you're not going to notice it consciously. It will make a difference, but it's going to make more of a difference at high levels of play more than anything, right? Lurker, the reduced effectiveness of Adaptive Talons from 0.71 seconds to 1.07 seconds. I actually don't think this is even enough. I still think the Lurkers are complete bullshit. I haven't tried it, but I do think, man, having this increase on the burrow speed and unburrow speed for Lurkers is really good, because it really feels like when you're playing against a Lurker style, they can overextend so far with their Lurkers, and then you set up a big flank, which you kind of need to do, which against a siege tank army, there's no escape. The tanks are just dead, right? Their army is dead. maybe they stim the bio away. But with lurkers, they'd just be like, oh, you're flanking me? And they just unburrow and sprint away like a bunch of Usain Bolts. And you're like, I just spent a minute setting up an awesome Zealot Immortal Archon flank to kill that army, and they just ran away. So this makes that slightly less obnoxious with their ability to like unburrow and get out in the middle of a fight. Likewise, it makes them a little bit less obnoxious as well for running forward and burrowing on the enemy units. And that's it, guys. That's our changes. So this is, I think, a good set of changes to address the biggest problem points in the game. DT Blink in late game PvT, disgusting. Shield Battery Rushes, everybody hates it at low level. So this is like the noob-friendly one. Void Ray getting reverted a little bit. Queen getting nerfed a bit, so those Queen pushes aren't as obnoxious, which is really great. Widowmind, that's kind of for everyone's benefit. Noobs, high-level players. The Lurker is going to be a little bit less obnoxious. I still think all of these things are going to be quite good. I would say the biggest change is the Protoss ones are like more nerfs. People are like, but my race got more nerfs and stuff like that. But I mean, the thing is, without the threat of the Queen Walks, yeah, 50 minerals is probably the biggest change here per Void Ray, right? But you could still, I still think those same Protoss builds are going to be decent, especially if there's no Queen Walk threat. Protoss players could be even greedier than ever to a certain extent. Just having to keep an eye out for, of course, Nidus Worms and Overlord's pooping creep. So we'll see exactly what happens here. Now, the question is, guys, where can you play this patch? I assumed, I was like, PTR, cool. Okay, so I went in game, right? And I went and I was like, oh, look at this. Testing is currently inactive. What? I can't. So thankfully, we had people already figured that out, and they let us know, guys. You go to Battle.net, get your launcher open, and you want to change your game version to public test realm. So it's on StarCraft. That's what I've got open. So you click the drop down, change to public test realm, and apparently it's a 28 gigabyte download. So get in there, download the game, and you can hop on the PTR. Now, I don't know if that's going to be a ranked ladder or it's just going to be anyone plays anyone. Usually on PTRs, it's a little bit just throw you into the pit of players. Don't expect it to be fantastically well balanced in terms of the ladder opponents, but just get in there, play some games, and hopefully if enough people are playing, it does actually match people with similarly skilled opponents. I have no idea. If anyone in chat knows, let me know. So guys, while we're doing that, let's take a look here at the responses in the community and discuss a little bit, because there's so much, and I'm sure people are going to go, this is unfair for my race, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I think these changes are so conservative. To summarize my first impressions, and I've just read this before I went live today, it seems very, very conservative. That would be my first impressions. So it's like, this is clearly a patch made by pro gamers who don't want to accidentally mess up the balance too bad or anything like that. And because StarCraft balance is in a pretty good position, I would have been much more risk taking if I was in charge of it. Except, would I though? If no one knew I was in charge of it. So let's be honest. I'll be honest, internet. If nobody knew that I was the culprit and that they could blame me for any unforeseen circumstances, then I would take more risks, okay? But only then. Only then. The fear of a very hardcore community saying you ruined their game is super real, guys. Protoss got 4 of the 7 nerfs, even though in tournament play they're not even performing that well lately. I mean, Protoss has been absolutely dominating the GM ladder, absolutely dominating the weekly cups in North America and Korea. Yet, at tip-top pro play and in the European weekly, that's where it's not been the case, has it? And that's a really weird thing, because we have had so many like Zerg GMs and like low-level pros and stuff like literally quit playing in the last year. And or play much less because of the Void Ray meta is a big part of it. And yet you've got these front-running freaks, right, who are undoubtedly way better than the top Protoss players. And it's hard to say, oh, that's just because they're better, right? So you've got Rogue, Dark in Korea. You've got Raynor and Cyril in Europe. And you've got Clem and Hero Marine in Europe. And then you've got Maru, and actually there's quite a lot of Terrans, but Maru especially at the very tippity top of Korea, who's insanely consistent, right? And you've got this like real drop down below all those guys to the Traps and Zests, right? Trap and Zest, very good players. Trap maybe won more premier events than Maru last year, but like we still get this like feeling of like Maru being so much better than him, especially in like GSL, right? Which is weird. I think Trap, but then you've also got to say all the top Protoss players got retired, right? They all because they had to go to the military service in Korea. In Europe, though, you can't argue that Showtime is kind of held just outside, guys, right? Showtime is held just outside of Hero Marine and Clem and Raynor and stuff, right? So him, the other guys in Europe, like there is quite a lot of good Protoss players like Drogo and so on who have really just been stuck in the middle of the pack recently. Drogo, you've got your Goblins, your Skilluses. Obviously, Max Pax has definitely come on up and risen up, and it's a shame he didn't play the World Championship because he does seem like one of the absolute best in the race right now. So that's a really hard argument, and I don't really know how I feel about it because there is a part of me that says, yes, these nerfs do suck. On the other hand, I think they are nerfing probably the most obnoxious things about Protoss. So we can say 4 out of 7, but what are we nerfing? Offensive shield battery cheese. Okay. Though technically this does nerf shield batteries on your natural before expansion's up, which is not the most important situation, but there are scenarios where it matters. So actually, people were saying, guys, scenario, this has just occurred to me. 1 gate expanders, what if a Zerg does a 1 base gas opening, right? And you're like building, and sometimes you end up actually delaying your Nexus and just going like, you get your wall off up, you defend with Zealots, then you get Adepts, you build a shield battery, and you just go like Stargate without even getting an expansion. Definitely your shield batteries, there might be some weird Zerg cheeses, right? Some Speedling Ravager all in, off like 1.5 bases, that is actually a bit more powerful just if that Nexus isn't up. It's a very rare case, but I can kind of imagine it happening sometimes. Obviously the Void Ray being more expensive, that does nerf one style of Protoss, but it's such a dominant style in PvZ recently that I can definitely see why people are very worried about it. We'll see. Valid discussion. The DT Blink nerf is pretty huge for late game PvT. It is hard to kill Terran armies in late game. I don't know if that's going to undo the fact that the DTs are still very good, though. A lot of people, of course, just very happy that the patch is coming. And I got to say, yeah, I mean, I think this is the main thing that sums up. Is this real or am I dreaming? Holy crap, they're doing it, the mad lads. And I got to say, shout out to the intern who is in that chat, along with all the pros who I believe came to a consensus with these changes. As far as I could tell, guys, in their chat, all the pros kind of had these big, long circular discussions. And I was talking to a few of the pros hearing about news of, oh, there's a patch coming. And I was like, yeah, so what goes on? And they're like, well, we're in this big chat and we talk. And I got to hear that like it's pretty frustrating. Our pro players had to put up, because there's some donkeys in there. Not every pro player is a genius. Some of them are morons and some of them are very selfish, right? Because they're humans and they're all like that, right? So let's just say some of the pro gamers were getting very frustrated with the pro gamers where they'd kind of all come together and they'd all voice their concerns and then say, okay, this is a change we propose. And others would say, we need to tweak it this way because of this concern. Others would say, oh, we need to tweak it this. They'd get this like consensus, right? So pro gamers have had their own little political system getting this whole thing going, right? And then someone would come in and they're like, yeah, but... And they'd like just do a 2-page rant and like derail the whole discussion right when they were getting to a consensus. So I know that a few of the pros were getting like really angry. And then obviously you've got issues where higher level pros are a little bit more condescending towards lower level pros who are like, you know, part-time pro gamers and stuff who were kind of voicing their thoughts. And like the tippity top guys are like, you know, Jesus, we've already got too many people in here talking. Why is this guy derailing this conversation and that sort of stuff? So I'm really fascinated. I wish I had been invited to that chat just so I could join in and see what the discussion was like. Because I got to say, hats off to the pro gamers for basically going through their own little political group discussion, and despite all having competing interests, coming to some conclusions. So it's kind of amazing they managed to get anything out of that group at all. So shout out to all of them. I'd say the StarCraft players are generally much more balanced, reasonable, and chill than they used to be. In the early days of StarCraft, they'd just be like, and they'd all just kind of like whine, and they're all so unreasonable. Everything was in extremes. No one wanted to learn or understand things. People were just constantly trying to whine and bitch and get their, you know, thing stronger and the other races weaker. And it's like lots of very imbalanced advice and all that sort of stuff. So Protoss Ground is not able to scale nearly as well as Terran or Zerg, forcing the Skytoss meta. Have you not built Disruptors, Colossus, and Storm before? I get EMP. EMP against Terran is definitely something which is very hard to deal with. But it is balanced by the fact that you can like A-move Zealots in 4 places and there's nothing Terran can do about it unless they're incredibly mechanically skilled. Voids were the sort of glue that allowed Protoss to play a defensive style. I'm curious as to how this will shape out in PvT and PvZ going forward. I still feel, even with the current balance before this patch, I keep seeing this Protoss ground is not good, Protoss ground can't scale. And I don't know what's going on, but I have a feeling there's a lot of people out there who are just like, well, I just make VOIDRAYS, and that look, I don't even know that player's name, Kerrigan's therapist, whatever. Don't hate on that player, because I've heard this. This is not just one person's take. This is a community-wide take. This is like a intellectual contagion in the Protoss community where it's like, look, I've seen all the Protoss pros go towards mass air, therefore we must all go mass air. And it's not true, because it's only true at the pro level. So I don't know. The problem I see is people complain like this is the sort of stuff that affects them. And you can only complain about that if you're talking about trap level play. If you're talking about tippity top pro level play, because you can look at it and say, well, all the top Protoss seem to think Skytoss is the only way, blah, 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 against Zerg at least, definitely not against Terran. Their ground is fantastic there. But I do think it's something where ground has always been good for Protoss, and people really underestimate how bloody strong it was. It's just that people haven't seen it recently, and most of us copy and emulate the pro styles. And so it's just been this thing where I'm really looking forward to people relearning how to play Protoss. And that's something we've been trying to teach in our Bronze to GM. So please, let's learn some ground Protoss play. Let's engage in movement and fun and excitement, and let's get it going. So guys, don't forget, if you do want to play, get on that public test realm, get in there. I'm going to be playing a whole lot of games the next few days on this, and just seeing how it plays out. Weaker lurkers, the DTs being not quite as abusive, all those little changes. I'm very happy to see how it plays out. And yeah, I just want to see, especially PvZ, how people are playing, how people adapt to these changes. And I also want to see Protoss players just pushing their greed as much as possible, saying, Queens can't even walk anymore. Let's see what I could do. I don't know. Take a 4th base at the 5-minute mark. Let's see if you can defend that with some Oracles or something. And maybe we'll see the return of Oracle into ground Protoss versus Zerg, which I think is a way more interesting style. So I would love some of those older PvZ metas back. Fingers crossed it happens. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Share your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll do a follow-up video when this patch actually drops. And fingers crossed it doesn't break anything in the game, because if it does, it might take them 6 months to fix it. No, I think it'll work. I think this is minor enough. I think this won't break anything. I really, really hope when this actually comes out, it doesn't break anything. They're doing the PTR first. So I think there's a good chance they figure it out. Thanks for watching, guys.